James Lee McFarland here with you guys again, brother from Harlem with high school education. Let me get back into how it was in the beginning when I first went to work for Ori's Custom Tailoring. Now, the building that we were in, 217 West 125th Street, like I say, was several doors down from the Apollo Theater. But who was in the building where we were? Now, I've already told you that I met Jackie Robinson like my first day there. But there were a lot of famous people in that building that I didn't know until I started working in that building. Now, there was a gentleman in that building named Phillip Randolph. Phillip Randolph is the gentleman who founded the sleeping car porters union. It was called the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car, National Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. He's the one who organized the brothers who worked on the railroad trains in the sleeping cars. They were porters, you know, they carried the bags, made sure people had the things that they need. They were the attendants of people that rode the railroad back then. So he founded and organized them to get better working condition and better pay. He was a great civil rights man back in the day. I had never heard of him before until I moved into that building, because I wasn't up on the whole civil rights movement when I was younger. So this is a guy who I learned later on what he did and who he was. Now, there was another gentleman in that building, Bayard Ruskin. He too was there. So who was he? He was Martin Luther King's, one of Martin Luther King's lieutenants, as they called him back then. I mean, he was one of the arms of that civil rights movement. Now, here's the funny thing about it. All during that time, and all during them coming in and out of the tailor shop, not one time, and no disrespect to neither one of them, but not one time did they ever talk about the movement to us. They never said, "Young man, do you really realize?" I told you, I used to go south and didn't understand what that whole movement was about. This is the time in my life when I just started to learn what that whole civil rights struggle was about. I used to make a very profound statement, and I'm going to be honest with you, because as I told you guys, there are a lot of brothers in Harlem that we didn't really know what was happening in the South. We just lived in Harlem, the Mecca for where people leaving the South was coming north. Now, my grandmother never really explained to me what that whole thing was about. Nor did my mother. She didn't really know that much because she came north at a very young age. She was only 6 when she came to New York, so she really didn't know the whole history. My grandmother never talked about it, neither did my partner's grandmother, neither did all of my partners. As I said, they really didn't know about this movement. They didn't know really what segregation was until they went into the military during Vietnam and the bases were in the South. Well, here were these civil rights leaders right there in the building. They never said too much about it. It was always the kind, friendly gesture that they made when they came into the tailor shop. They did, and we took care of whatever business we needed for them. But I never once heard them say, "You guys realize what's happening in the South? You know, we're living here in Harlem. Do you guys realize that segregation is all around us? It's not just in the South." Like I said, I was blessed because I went south as a boy, but I didn't understand it. And then before this time came about, I told you how my family moved around New York into what? Segregated communities. So I had a first-hand look-see at a lot of what was happening then. But when you're in Harlem, you're home, you're with your people. You know, you're enjoying life, you're doing this, you're doing that. And everything is great. So we kind of just think everything is great, but it's not. So let us not fool ourselves about what this whole thing was about. But here I am in a building with all these famous people. Jackie Robinson was civil rights leader back then. Didn't realize that initially. We just looked at him as the black ball player who broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball. Phillip Randolph, who organized the people, his people, porters, call them sleeping car porters, for the railroads back then. Now, when did he actually organize them? The year? I had to look that up. But he's the one who did it. Bayard Rustin, civil rights advocate, Martin Luther King's closest allies. There he was in the building. All these people were in the building. And I'm saying to myself, wow. But it wasn't until after we left that building that I realized, because they eventually tore the building down and made an office building, an office tower. It was an office building, but we were only 5 stories high. They eventually built a tower, I don't know, 14, 15 stories high, in the same little spot that it was in. Because like I told you guys, in those days, you can't build this way, you have to build that way. So they took a 5-story building down and added 10 more stories up, made it about 15 stories high. And it was, whoa, put a bank in it, put everything in it. Well, it was just a little old, believe it or not, a little raggedy building, like most of those buildings were. Built at the turn of the century, but it was there. Also in that building, who do we have? We had a famous musician, famous to my people, and his name was Olatunji. And he was an African musical artist who was very popular on the scene back then. He had music all around. He was around during the time of Hugh Masekela and Miriam Makeba. They were African artists who were around. They too played the Apollo Theater all the time. So all of this is happening. That's why I call it when the magic was real. Because Harlem was exciting then. And I'm in a building where all these people are. I was 20 years old when I went to work on 125th Street. I'm just learning the world. I'm just learning, you know, my way around. I've heard these artists most of my life, but now I'm getting to meet them. I'm getting to talk to them personally about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I use that phrase because I never really get into a person's career, how they got started, this, that, and the other. Tell me who else you are. Tell me what you like to do. Tell me if your family, if you went to school, like the conversations that I would have with Mr. Robinson. You know, tell me about your family. I know what it was like being black in America, because I'm black. So I knew these things. So I didn't really want to hear how it felt. And I used to hear these redundant questions being asked to all of these people over and over again. By us. Now I can see white media, but by us all the time. How did it feel being, well, the question was really valid. How did it feel being the first? I could understand that. But then they would go on and on about the pressure of being, pressure about being first is one thing. Pressure about being black, anybody black knows the pressure. So you shouldn't have to ask that part of the question. But it was asked to them over and over again. It was asked to Mr. Randolph over and over again. How does it feel? What you did it for the brothers, you did it for your people. But how did it feel with the pressure? We all know how pressure in America is, especially when you're a black person in America. It's just part of life. But that whole 125th Street vibe in Harlem was so exciting. And when you start meeting these people, the excitement gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Because a lot of these people were larger than life. Oh, they were way out there. And here they were, right there in the building where I was. And I got a chance to shake their hand, meet them personally, talk about things I had no idea. So, the brother from Harlem with the high school education is going to sign off now. And I'm going to get into more and more of these people. And I'm going to bring you the real people of the streets of Harlem, especially on 25th Street. Talk with you again. Be blessed.